There's a billionaire who's never raised his voice in a meeting. A world leader who apologizes when he's wrong. A woman who built a Fortune 500 company and still asks more questions than she gives answers. What do they all have in common? They've mastered something that 99% of people get completely backwards about: confidence. You see confident people every day and think you know what you're looking at. The guy who speaks the loudest in meetings. The woman who name drops constantly. The person who always has to be right about everything. But here's what's going to mess with your head. Those aren't the confident ones. Those are the most insecure people you'll ever meet. The truly confident ones? You probably don't even notice them at first. They're doing something so subtle, so counterintuitive, that most people miss it entirely. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. Machiavelli figured this out 500 years ago, but somehow we've all forgotten his most important lesson. He discovered that real power doesn't look like what you think it looks like. In fact, it looks like the exact opposite. Want to know something that'll blow your mind? The person you think is the weakest in any room might actually be the most dangerous. And the person everyone thinks is the alpha, they're usually one criticism away from a complete meltdown. I'm about to show you how to spot the difference. More importantly, I'm going to show you how to become the person that everyone underestimates until it's too late. The person who never has to fight for respect because they command it without saying a word. Think I'm exaggerating? By the end of this video, you'll start seeing confident people completely differently. You'll realize that everything you thought you knew about confidence was not just wrong. It was the exact opposite of the truth. Before we move forward, do like the video and subscribe to my channel. All right, let me paint you a picture that's probably happened to you more times than you want to admit. You're in some social situation, maybe a work party, maybe just hanging out with friends. There's this one person who just won't stop talking about themselves. Every story you tell, they've got a better one. Every achievement you mention, theirs was bigger. They're speaking loud enough for half the room to hear, interrupting people left and right, and constantly steering every conversation back to how awesome they are. And here's the weird part. In the moment, you might actually think, wow, this person's really confident. They seem so sure of themselves, so comfortable being the center of attention. But then something feels off. You walk away from that conversation and you don't feel energized, you feel drained. You don't feel inspired by them, you feel annoyed. Then later that night, you're driving home and you can't stop thinking about this other person who was there. Someone who barely said anything, but when they did talk, it was actually interesting. They asked you questions about yourself. They seemed genuinely curious about your life. And somehow, even though they didn't perform or brag or demand attention, they're the person you actually remember. Here's what Machiavelli understood that most people never figure out. He said that real power is invisible until it needs to be seen. The people who constantly display their strength are usually the ones who have the least of it. It's like someone walking around telling everyone they're rich while their credit cards are maxed out. But here's the part that's going to hit you in the gut. Most of us are that loud person more often than we want to admit. Maybe not as extreme, but we do it too. We feel insecure, so we try to prove how great we are. We feel invisible, so we talk louder. We feel unimportant, so we brag about our accomplishments. And the crazy thing is, it doesn't work. The more we try to convince people we're confident, the more obvious it becomes that we're not. Every time we perform confidence, instead of just being confident, we actually push people away from us instead of drawing them in. Want to know where this all started? You're probably 8 or 9 years old, and someone embarrasses you in front of the class. Maybe you got an answer wrong. Maybe you tripped. Maybe someone made fun of your clothes. And instead of just feeling embarrassed and moving on, you learned that the way to handle that feeling was to fight back harder, speak louder, prove you were better than whoever made you feel small. That moment taught you that confidence meant never showing weakness, never backing down, never letting anyone see that their words affected you. So you got louder, more aggressive, more defensive. And for a while it worked. People stopped messing with you. But what you didn't realize is that they also stopped trusting you, stopped feeling comfortable around you, Stop seeing the real you underneath all that performance. Okay, so let me explain this with something you've probably seen before. You know how a little dog will bark and snarl and act all tough when a big dog walks by? All that noise, all that aggression, all that show. But a really big dog, a confident dog, they just walk by calmly. They don't need to prove anything because they know what they are. That's exactly what's happening with people. The ones making the most noise about how great they are, they're the little dogs. The ones who are actually powerful, they're just walking by, minding their own business. Here's what's wild about real confidence. It's almost boring at first glance. Real confident people don't tell you they're confident. They don't need to win every argument. They can be wrong about something and it doesn't ruin their whole day. They can listen to someone criticize them without getting defensive. They can be in a room where they're not the smartest person and actually enjoy it. But we miss this completely because we're looking for the wrong things. We think confidence looks like the person who never backs down, who always has a comeback, who dominates every conversation. But that's not confidence. That's insecurity with a megaphone. Real confidence is way more subtle. It's the person who can say, "I don't know," without feeling stupid. It's someone who can compliment others without feeling like it takes away from them. It's the person who doesn't need to be right about everything because their self-worth isn't tied to being perfect. Machiavelli wrote something that most people completely misunderstand. He said, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." Most people think this means you should fake it until you make it, put on a good show, make people think you're something you're not. But he actually meant the opposite. He was warning about people who are all appearance and no substance. The people who understand real confidence, they're not trying to appear as anything. They're just being themselves, and that authenticity is magnetic in a way that performance never can be. And here's the part that's going to change how you see everyone around you. Once you know what to look for, you can spot fake confidence from a mile away. The person who talks over everyone, insecure. The one who always has to one-up your stories, insecure. The one who can't handle any criticism, super insecure. But the person who listens more than they talk, who asks genuine questions about your life, who can laugh at themselves when they mess up, that's someone who's actually comfortable in their own skin. Look, if this is hitting different than what you expected, hit that subscribe button. Not because I need the numbers, but because most people are never going to hear this stuff. And drop a comment about the most confident person you know. I bet when you really think about it, they're probably way quieter than you initially thought. Let me tell you about this guy new in college. We'll call him Marcus. This dude was everything you'd think confidence looks like. Loud, always had an opinion about everything, never admitted he was wrong about anything. In group projects, he'd take over immediately, tell everyone what to do, act like he was the natural leader. At parties, he was the guy telling the loudest stories, always trying to be the center of attention. If someone told a funny story, he had a funnier one. If someone mentioned they did something cool, he'd done something cooler. He seemed so sure of himself that a lot of people actually looked up to him. But here's what was really happening. After a while, people started avoiding him. They'd see him coming and suddenly remember they had to be somewhere else. In group projects, people would try to get into different groups. At parties, conversations would just naturally move away from wherever he was standing. Marcus had no idea why this kept happening. In his mind, he was being confident, showing leadership, entertaining people. But what everyone else saw was someone who was so desperate for approval that he couldn't let anyone else shine for even 5 minutes. Then there was this other guy, David. Quiet, didn't say much, but when he did talk, people listened. He'd ask questions about your life and actually care about the answers. If you had a problem, he'd help you figure out instead of telling you about all the problems he'd already solved. When he didn't know something, he'd just say, "I have no idea," and ask someone to explain it to him. Guess which one people actually respected? Guess which one became successful after college? It wasn't even close. Here's the thing everyone gets wrong about confidence. We think it's about never showing weakness, never being vulnerable, never letting anyone see you sweat. But that's not confidence, that's armor. And armor is heavy. It's exhausting to wear. And everyone can tell you're wearing it. Real confidence is the exact opposite. It's being okay with not knowing everything. It's being comfortable with other people being better than you at things. It's being able to mess up and laugh about it instead of making excuses. Think about the last time you felt genuinely confident. Not performing confident, not trying to impress anyone, but actually confident. I bet you were probably relaxed. You weren't worried about what people thought. You weren't trying to prove anything. You were just being yourself. That's what real confidence feels like. It's not this high energy, look at me thing. It's more like being at home in your own skin. You're not trying to be anyone else. You're not trying to hide who you are. You're just comfortable being you. And here's the crazy part. When you stop trying so hard to appear confident, that's when people actually start seeing you as confident. When you stop performing, that's when your real personality can come through. And your real personality, flaws and all, is way more interesting than any performance you could put on. All right, here's the part that's going to sting a little bit. And I need you to be honest with yourself for a second. How many times have you caught yourself trying to sound smarter than you actually are? How many times have you name-dropped someone or bragged about something just to seem more impressive? How many times have you argued about something you didn't really care about just because you couldn't stand being wrong? Look, we've all done it. I've done it. You've done it. Everyone watching this has done it. We've all performed confidence instead of actually having it. We've all tried to convince other people we're something we're not because we weren't comfortable with who we actually are. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Every time you did that, every time you put on that show, you weren't being confident. You were being desperate. You were basically telling everyone around you that you needed their approval to feel good about yourself. But listen, I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because once you see it, once you really understand what you've been doing, you can stop doing it. And that's when everything changes. Most people never figure this out. They spend their whole lives putting on this performance, exhausting themselves, trying to impress people who don't even care. They build this whole fake version of themselves and then wonder why their relationships feel shallow, why people don't really seem to connect with them. It's like this. Imagine you've been living in this house your whole life, but instead of letting people come inside and see how you actually live, you build this fancy front yard with all these decorations and sculptures and signs telling everyone how awesome your house is. So everyone who walks by sees this elaborate display, but nobody ever gets to see the real house. They don't get to sit on your couch, see your family photos, hear your actual thoughts and feelings. All they see is the performance you put on outside. And after a while, you start to forget what the inside of your house even looks like. You spend so much time maintaining the front yard show that you lose touch with who you actually are underneath all of it. That's what happened to your confidence. You started performing it so early, probably when you're just a kid trying to fit in, that you forgot what it feels like to just be yourself without all the extra stuff. But here's the good news. The real you, the person underneath all that performance, is still there. And that person is way more interesting, way more likable, and way more confident than any character you've been trying to play. So here's where everything you thought you knew about confidence gets completely flipped upside down. You've been told your whole life that confident people never show weakness, that they always know what to say, that they never back down from a fight, that they're always the most successful person in the room. But all of that is complete garbage. Real confidence isn't about never being wrong. It's about being okay when you are wrong. It's not about never feeling insecure. It's about not needing to hide it when you do. It's not about always having the answer. It's about being comfortable saying, I have no clue, but let's figure it out together. Here's what actually happens when you stop performing confidence and start just being confident. You become way less predictable. People can't manipulate you anymore because you're not desperate for their approval. You can't be baited into arguments because you don't need to be right about everything. You become impossible to control because you're not trying to control how others see you. And people notice. They start treating you differently. You'll be in meetings and realize people are actually listening when you talk, even though you're talking less. You'll be at parties and notice conversations naturally flow toward you, even though you're not trying to be the center of attention. Your friends will start coming to you with their problems because you've become someone who actually listens instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. People will start trusting you with bigger things because you've stopped trying so hard to prove you can handle them. And here's the weirdest part. You'll stop caring as much about impressing people, but people will be more impressed by you. You'll stop trying to be the smartest person in the room, but people will start seeing you as really intelligent. You'll stop performing confidence, but people will actually see you as the most confident person they know. That's because real confidence is magnetic in a way that fake confidence never can be. When someone is genuinely comfortable in their own skin, when they're not trying to be anything other than who they are, it gives everyone around them permission to relax too. And that's when you become dangerous. Not because you're aggressive or dominating or loud, but because you can't be shaken. You can't be thrown off your game by criticism because your game isn't about being perfect. You can't be manipulated by flattery because you don't need constant validation. You become the kind of person that others depend on because you're not dependent on them. That's what Machiavelli really understood. The most powerful people aren't the ones putting on the biggest show. They're the ones who don't need to put on a show at all. Here's something that will completely change how you spot real confidence. And I guarantee you've never thought about this before. Watch what happens when someone gives a confident person a compliment versus when they compliment someone who's insecure. When you compliment someone who's faking confidence, they do one of two things. Either they brush it off immediately like, oh, this old thing, or it was nothing because they're uncomfortable with positive attention, or they grab onto it and won't let go, bringing up that compliment for weeks afterward because they're starving for validation. But when you compliment someone with real confidence, they just say, thank you, and move on. That's it. They don't deflect it, they don't minimize it, but they also don't make it into this huge deal. They accept it the same way they'd accept someone telling them the time. It's just information about how you're feeling, not proof of their worth as a human being. And here's the part that's going to mess with your head. Insecure people are either fishing for compliments all the time or they're terrified of them. They'll post something on social media and then refresh it every 5 minutes to see how many likes it got. Or they'll dress up really nice and then make weird comments like, I look terrible today, just hoping someone will disagree with them. Confident people, they never fish for compliments because they don't need them to feel okay about themselves. And when compliments do come, they don't change how they feel about themselves either way. Their self-worth is like a thermostat. It stays pretty much the same regardless of what's happening around them. That's why they're so comfortable to be around. You never feel like you have to manage their emotions or constantly reassure them. They're just solid. Watch what happens when someone gets called out for being wrong in front of other people. Not just gently corrected, but clearly, obviously wrong about something everyone can see. People who are faking confidence, they lose their minds. They'll argue even when they know they're wrong because admitting it feels like social suicide. They'll double down, change the subject, attack the person who corrected them, or come up with some elaborate explanation for why they're technically still right. Their whole body language changes, they get tense, their voice gets higher, they start talking faster. But here's what confident people do that's absolutely wild. They pause for a second, process what just happened, and then they smile or even laugh. They'll say something like, wow, I was completely wrong about that, or thanks for catching that. And then they just move on, like it's no big deal. The room always gets weird for a second because everyone's expecting a fight or some drama. But instead, this person just owned their mistake so cleanly that there's nothing left to argue about. And somehow, instead of looking stupid, they end up looking even more credible than before. It's like they have this superpower where being wrong actually makes people trust them more. Because everyone in that room is thinking if they're this honest about the stuff they got wrong, they're probably being honest about everything else too. And here's the kicker. They're not doing it strategically. They're not thinking, oh, if I admit I'm wrong, people will respect me more. They genuinely just don't care about being perfect because their self-worth isn't tied to never making mistakes. Machiavelli once said something that most people completely misunderstood. He said, "It is better to be feared than loved." But here's what he really meant. He wasn't talking about being scary or mean. He was talking about being respected for who you actually are instead of being liked for who you're pretending to be. And look, you're not your achievements. You're not your job title. You're not your bank account or your social media followers or how many people laugh at your jokes. You're a complete person who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone to be valuable. So here's what I want you to do. Next time you feel that urge to impress someone, the need to prove how smart or successful or funny you are, just pause for a second. Ask yourself one simple question. What would happen if I just acted normal right now? Not boring normal, just authentically you normal. The you that your closest friends see when nobody else is around. The you that doesn't need to perform or compete or prove anything. That question will change everything because it breaks the pattern. It reminds you that you have a choice. You can keep performing or you can just be yourself and see what happens. Trust me, what happens is way better than anything you could perform. You're never going to look at confident people the same way again. And honestly, you're never going to look at yourself the same way either. It's not that performing confidence is evil or anything like that. It's just that now you know there's something so much better. You can still be successful, still be a leader, still influence people and achieve your goals. But you're going to do it as yourself, not as some character you think people want to see. And that's going to protect you from something that ruins most people's lives. You'll stop trading your peace of mind for other people's approval. You'll stop exhausting yourself trying to maintain some image that isn't even really you. Your relationships are going to get deeper because people will finally be connecting with the real you. Your achievements are going to feel better because they'll actually be yours, not some performance version of you. And your confidence is going to be the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Because here's the truth that changes everything. The confidence you don't need to prove to anyone is the only kind that actually matters. The respect you don't have to demand is the only kind worth having. And the person you don't have to pretend to be is exactly who you were meant to be all along.